Hello and welcome to Bread of Life, a daily devotional program which each week features a different area pastor. Our speaker for this week is Pastor Cary Schmidt of Newington.
Hi, I'm Pastor Cary from Emmanuel Baptist Church, and thanks for joining us again for the fourth component of our devotional study this week on the death of Christ, the story of the Bible, and the narrative of God's story of reality. We said, first of all, what the Bible is most essentially good news about Jesus and about what God has done. It is not about me. It is not about what I should do to save myself. And it is not just good advice about how to make my life better. And we were talking about Isaiah 53, profiling this story, this mysterious story about a suffering servant who would come and in a substitutionary way, in a stand-in kind of way, he would take on him the sins, the failures, the crimes of other people, and then he would be put to death for those crimes. And then he would be alive again, seeing the results of his suffering and the rewards of his suffering, that the pleasure of the results of his suffering, he would be alive to see. And we were talking about how this is such a mystery to an Old Testament reader who didn't understand how a man could suffer for the sins of another, why that would be necessary, who couldn't comprehend how a man could die and then be alive again and see the reward of his death. None of this made sense until Jesus. In fact, when you read the entire Old Testament, you end up with a lot of questions about God. You understand that God is all-powerful and holy and a creative God who spoke the worlds as we know them into existence. You understand that God is pursuing a relationship with man, but that man has fallen away from God and that man essentially runs from God and by nature rebels against God and pushes him away and rejects him. But you see God all throughout the Old Testament in a relentless pursuit of man, of a relationship with man. But at times you also see a God of judgment. You see a God who does afflict and often pours out what appears to be punishment. And that doesn't jive with our hearts and minds. We think, well, I know God is loving. How can he be judging as well? And sometimes people say to me, Pastor Cary, I like the God of the New Testament in Jesus, who is loving and tender and gracious and kind. But I struggle with the God of the Old Testament, who often speaks of judgment and often speaks of hardship. And friend, can I share with you in the just few moments we have remaining? The God of the Bible is one God, Old Testament and New Testament. He is both holy and loving. Now that's a big concept, so let me break it down. Under God's holiness, you have his wrath, his anger, his judgment, his justice, his sense of rightness, and that he is perfectly right. Now, when I say anger and justice and judgment, don't humanize those things as fickle emotions. God expresses only perfect anger or perfect judgment or perfect justice. And he is also loving. And under the word love, you might put all the warm and fuzzy things that we love about God: his tenderness, his grace, his mercy, his compassion, his patience, his up-closeness, the things that we want in a loving God, you'd put under the category of love. But can I challenge your thinking for a moment that don't you want a powerful God who's going to make all things right? Don't you long for a powerful God who has the authority and the power to vindicate every wrong thing that's ever happened, to vindicate every injustice, and to execute final and ultimate justice? You know, friend, when you try to separate God's holy anger and judgment from his warm and tender love, you end up with one of two things: either an angry God who doesn't love, or a loving God who isn't powerful enough to be just and to make things right again. In actuality, his holiness and his love go together. And his love is an expression of his judgment, and his judgment is an expression of his love. Just like you would defend your family or defend a child that was being threatened, so God is so righteous and so perfect that he's going to vindicate every wrong thing. And he's so loving that he wants to save you in the process. The question of the Bible is, how does God uphold his holiness and fulfill and express his love at the same time? And that we'll have to pick up tomorrow.
You've been listening to Pastor Cary Schmidt of Newington, and this has been Bread of Life, a program to encourage you from God's Word.